Be on YouTube later. Okay, thank you, Mr. If you have any cell phones, please shut them off. If you would, we appreciate it. And again, apologize for having to get back to it. I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Christopher Morgan from the planning staff and introduce these. And we're gonna be introduce support people to it. And anybody else to be presented.
See, is this better? Okay, great. We have a new audio system that we're working with. And so planning commissioners, you each have a microphone or you're adjacent to a microphone. So if you could speak into the microphone, press the little button there and that activates it, and then you press it again if you're recording you or hearing you. But anyway, we apologize to everybody. Had no idea there would be so many people here. We had some logistical challenges in setting this up, and our regular meeting room is not available, although I don't think it even holds as many people as are here right now. But it is on YouTube. Are we streaming yet? Yeah. So we are live streaming on YouTube. So if anybody wants to go to another location and watch it on YouTube, you're welcome to. It is a meeting for the Planning Commission to get updated on Union Pier and to have interaction with the Union Pier planning team. It is not a meeting for public participation. There will be many of those as far as the approval process that any floods or things like that go through for this development. But again, apologies that we are in a limited size space here. And again, there are lots of other places you can see the presentation that you will see today. But anyway, with that, I'm going to turn over to the State Ports Authority. If you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Christopher. Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, thank you for inviting us to this information session today to share some information about the Union Pier project. My name is Jordy Yarborough. I'm the Senior Vice President of Statewide Stakeholders and Local Government Relations for the Ports Authority. Just want to make mention kind of the background here for us and from our perspective. The Port Authority is responsible for 1 out of 10 jobs in the state of South Carolina. We have more than a $63 billion annual economic impact on the state. And a big portion of that is, and the big duty that we have in that is investing in our infrastructure. So from the port's perspective, a big part of this project, of course, is monetizing the property's non-maritime use for future investment in our facilities. For example, advancing phase 2 of the Lebanon terminal would be one area we would invest these monies that we generate from a sale of this property. It's also very important to us that we get this right. And that's why, because we're in the business of port business, not in urban planning or in development, we engaged the LOW team, Jacob Lindsay and Dan Batista, to spearhead this effort on behalf of the port. They have assembled a top-notch team of designers and engineers that you will hear from today. And so we really are excited they're going to share with you what we've done thus far. I've seen many of you at the previous engagements, and then look forward to working through this process so we can have the property out for sale next year. So thank you again for inviting us to present today. I'm going to pass it to Jacob Lindsay with LOW, who will make further introductions of our team. And of course, we will all be around the questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much, members of the Planning Commission, city staff, members of the public for being here, and especially to the Planning Commission for requesting that we come to this informational workshop. We're so glad to be here. And at your request, this session for you all who were not able to attend our public engagement processes over the summer, it's a continuation of that process. What you're going to see today is the content of our engagement process and the master plan for Union Pier that have already been presented to the public back in October on the 27th. This content is already up on our website, but we wanted to make sure that you all had the chance to view it on your own terms and to ask any questions that you may have of us and our team. Now, as we go, feel free to ask questions and we'll do our best to answer them. So we don't have to hold all of our questions until the end, unless you feel differently, Mr. Chair.
Good.
So we're here at your disposal. And with that said, today is a continuation of the discussion that we have had about the future of Union Pier. Now, we have a lot of content to present today, and you all are going to see the full summary of all of our team's thinking, as well as the public input at the site. With that said, I think it's important to once again clarify the roles of the different individuals and groups who are working on this project. So the Ports Authority, represented today by Ms. Doherty Yarborough, are the owners of Union Pier and have been since it became a public facility. They will be selling this property and it will go into private hands in the future when that sale takes place. They're the owners. They have retained Lowe. We are here as first myself, Jacob Lindsay, as well as Dan Batista from our Charleston office. Lowe is a 50-year-old company. We celebrate our 50th anniversary in business this year. And we are a national organization with offices all across the country, specializing in real estate of all types. We work in all different asset classes, except industrial and single-family detached. Other than that, Lowe builds, develops, and manages projects of this type all across the country. And we're so thrilled to be here working on behalf of the Ports Authority. Also with us are our lead design team from Perkins and Will. We're thrilled to have one of the nation's best shops to work on the urban design of this plan, and a team that have worked on the redevelopment of ports all across the world. And today you'll hear from Cassie Branham and Jeff Williams, our two lead designers, and they'll walk you through the thinking, the plan, and the engagement process. We also have a number of other, in fact, an army of designers and engineers behind this project who have contributed to this. And I want to draw special attention to Sherwood, who are our lead resiliency engineers. They're the ones who have crafted our holistic water management philosophy. They couldn't be here today, so I'll walk you through that part of the presentation. And finally, the one and only Brian Hellman, our land use attorney, who could not be here because of another obligation, but he will be here, of course, for all of our future meetings. So those are the members who are working on this project, among many others. I want to talk just briefly about the project and then finish up and turn it over to our designers so we can get into the really important parts of this presentation. So in terms of this project itself, as I said before, the Ports Authority will be selling this property. They will put it into private hands after having been a public asset. This site has only ever been a seaport. It's never been anything else. It's never been a neighborhood. It's never been anything but port. And that's really unique. So this change is an important change for the peninsula and for the whole city of Charleston. Now, with that said, in putting this into private hands, the Ports Authority made a choice. And I want to draw attention to this choice. They made the decision to plan the site, to go through a planning process, which is what they've retained all of us to do. That stands in contrast to just selling the property without going through a planning process. And what we have done over the course of the summer and continue to do today is to bring all kinds of thinking, including the ideas of many of the stakeholders, members of the public, who have put their thoughts and their heart into this project, as have our own design teams. That choice to plan the project leads to a planned unit development, a master plan, which you all will see, and which City Council will see. Now, everybody's worried that this project is going to move too fast and you aren't going to see the PUD. Just to be very clear, this is, and for members of the public as well, this is not a voting. No decisions are to be made today. This is an informational workshop. We will be back in the spring. We will be back for a public hearing for a vote from you when the project is ready and when the PUD is ready to be reviewed. That's a whole separate process which we will engage. Now, where do we stand today in terms of the project? We have been through a wonderful public engagement process. We've heard from over 1,000 people during the course of that effort. We continue to do that. We continue to evolve the plan as we go. We are now documenting that planning process and documenting that input, including what we hear from you today. And that will go into the planned unit development, into our zoning documents. That will be in a process from January through April of going through review and going through preparation, and hopefully we'll land on your desk in April for a true review, through public hearing and true vote. That's our timeline. So we're not going to present to you a full PUD tomorrow. We're going to work together to make sure that it's done the right way. I'll finish with this. This will be stated over and over, but from our standpoint, from the planning and development standpoint, there's some key priorities in this project that have risen to the top. First and foremost is that the future of Union Pier has improved quality of life in downtown Charleston. We know that transportation and mobility have to be improved by this project, by extending the street grid, by connecting these streets, improving intersections, improving the functionality of East Bay and Washington streets. We have to improve mobility on the peninsula. We know that the rice mill has to be preserved. It needs to be stabilized and it will be incorporated into the master plan, just to put that on the record right up front. Honoring the mosquito fleet at the right location is something that we've heard from the community and is something that will be included in this plan. The last few things. First of all, of course, I hope this goes without saying, creating a great walkable new urban neighborhood with a full mix of uses, housing, workplaces, shops, all of the things that go into a great urban neighborhood, as well as rebuilding the waterfront and making it public forever and including a whole complement of great public spaces throughout this plan. That's what you'll see here, and that's what speaks to the Ports Authority's decision to create a master plan versus just selling this to one high bidder or to many high bidders, as could have been their easiest option. And the last thing, and this is, I'll conclude on this. This site is very important for many reasons, but it's especially important to Peninsula when it comes to water management. And a holistic water management plan was the thing we started with, and it will be the thing we end with in this project, making sure that our teams have addressed water management in a thoughtful way that, again, improves life on the peninsula. That's what you're going to see. Those are some of our higher level goals. Now, you've heard too much from me. I really want to go ahead and turn this over. And with that said, we're welcome to take questions throughout this presentation. And I think maybe just raise hands or even just jump in and we can take them as we go. So with that said, I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to Cassie Branham from Perkins and Will to begin our presentation.
Jacob, let me say this. We appreciate the fact that most of the folks, you have to turn the mic on. We appreciate the fact that most of the folks on the planning commission have also toured the site, which we appreciate y'all's time in doing that and walk the site. That was a good exercise. Thank you.
For those of you who have been able to join, thank you so much for the time that you spent to get out onto the site. You can also see the site from the sides as well, but happy to do that and glad that you all, for those of you who have been able to do that, glad that you're able to. With that said, I'm going to turn this over to Cassie Branham from Perkins and Will.
Hello, everyone. Let me get comfortable so I'm not screeching at you guys for the next 2 minutes. So we have a lot to talk about. As Jacob said, we have a lot of material. And for those of you that have been to some of our past workshops, this is the same material that we presented at the end of October. We're going to go through it in the same sort of format. If you, as we said, if you have questions, please go ahead and jump right in. And is there a magical button to progress the slide? Can I do it? Oh, perfect. Okay, so there's 3 things that are kind of chapters of information that we want to share with you today. One is the planning process that we've been through thus far that started, as Jacob said, earlier in the summer and has gone really up until this moment and will go on well into the future. Our understanding of this place, both in terms of the past, present, and future, this is a very special site, and we took a lot of time to not only do our own research, to talk to experts in the field here in the city of Charleston, learn from the community, and try to bring kind of a global understanding together that we feel like really captures what's happening at Union Pier. And then the master plan. So our principles that you'll see in a few minutes that we've developed through our engagement process and how those principles have landed in the physical plan. So the process itself. So as Jacob said, we have talked to thousands of people. Some of you, I know I've talked to personally in this room. We had a series of comment cards that we've shared across all of our meetings, that we've had large public meetings, we've had small meetings. So Jacob and Jordy have been out talking to neighborhoods, talking to organizations. I believe all you have to do is call Jacob and he'll come and talk to you. So just a point there that the conversations will continue. And we've been taking all of this information and putting it together. For those of you that haven't been to some of the past meetings, we thought it would be helpful to share this video. And so this is a series of these meetings that we started actually here downstairs earlier in the fall, September, August, and talked about kind of what this site means, our understanding of the history of the place, and tried to really understand what the goals were from the community. We then took that forward and came with a series of alternatives of what we felt like the site could have. And we had 2 meetings focused on that work. And then our most recent meeting was back here at the end of October, really talking about the master plan that we're going to see today. So it was those large 4 engagements and then a whole smattering of smaller meetings that happened in between. We had As you can see on these pages, we have a physical model that we've been trying to understand and explore what exactly is there today. What is the size and scale of this place as it relates to the rest of the city? Being able to draw different ideas on how connectivity would work, how open space would work, and really get a lot of feedback on that. We talked about massing and density, building heights, open spaces, different types of open space program. And we heard tremendous amounts of feedback. I mean, in general, we heard support for the project with a lot of, I love it, but I'd really like to see X, or I'd really like to see Y, or have you considered A, B, C? And so those are the things, as Jacob said, that we've really been taking into account as we monitor this. So we have this spreadsheet. So we've been tracking and can share all the individual comments that we've received. And then we've been taking these individual comments and trying to synthesize them in a way that we can develop themes. What are the things that are really rising to the top after all these conversations we've been having? And I want to walk you through a summary of these themes. The larger the word, the more we heard about it. So when you can look at this, you see things like rice mill facade, waterfront. You also see concern, which is very true. We have heard a lot of concern, affordable housing, other things like, I'll go back, crown jewel, continuous waterfront path. There's a lot of different things in here. So what we've done is try to take these kind of all these comments and break them into these 10 big themes. So for big ideas, that this must be for Charlestonians, a world-class experience. There's things like develop the crown and the jewel of the city. And every time I look at the slide, I think Charleston is a jewel. So how are we going to develop this as the crown jewel? An extension of the city, extension of the neighborhood, ecotourism, this village, a beautiful place, this strong relationship to history. Jacob mentioned the rice mill facade and its preservation, access and acknowledgement of the mosquito fleet, a really strong connection to maritime history, and how do we get people out into the water as part of that? A relationship to the water. So I talked through a lot of these already, but I think one thing that really rose to the top through a lot of our conversations was people wanting to bring a boat up to the side of Union Pier, park it, get out, get on a boat, have a water taxi, really have an experience with Charleston as a waterfront city and using the site in that way. For connectivity, connect the city grid, walkable community, a lot about multimodal trails and transit, of other ways to move around Charleston, not by car, obviously by foot, but how do we continue to grow those on the waterfront? And then connections, broader connections, regional trail networks, the connection to the bridge and across. Open spaces, so we heard everything from small distributed open spaces to can we just have one large big open space? Amenities for residents, so the people that live here in Charleston, not tourists, so things like dog parks and playgrounds and places for people to go and be social together. Performance, so as Jacob said, that the site needs to perform for water, it also needs to perform in all kinds of other ways. And so things like tree cover and urban ecology, and how do we think about creating the right amount of shade and softness for the site, of protecting green space and the wildlife, of also the types of plants that get planted there in the future. Program and use, we heard a lot of things. I'm not going to read through all of them, but you can see that there's a lot of diversity in what we're seeing here. Like every type of housing imaginable, I feel like is starting to appear on this list. Concern about hotels, but also we heard a need for hotels. That we heard, pro tourism, and then let's focus on community serving retail. So I think the great thing about this site is that it's large and it can have a little bit of everything for everyone and really be an extension of the city for Charlestonians first and for others second. Architectural character of matching with the city, looking like Charleston, of variety and quirks, and really being a place that feels approachable for everyone. Massing and height, you can see that there was quite a lot here from, buildings need to avoid walls, they need to breathe, where density should be located, the types of density, heights of buildings, blending of heights, just a lot, as you all know, about height, density, and mass on the site. And we understand that the city's stance on where density should go. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later. Overarching concerns. So as I said in the beginning, there was a lot of concerns about traffic, crowds, of what the development of this site means in the future. We're taking all of this into account. There were also concerns about more community involvement, minority participation, and how this project moves forward, local participation in contractors and who touches the project and how jobs happen. And then, a lot of questions about the process of selling the land, what goes forward, kind of like what is the next step, so on and so forth. And so Jacob described it a little bit earlier, but if we want to, we can get into it after this. And then how projects actually go through after the rezoning of what does it look like to go through the VAR and what does it look like to actually build an individual building on the site long term. So we then took all of that and we tried to funnel it down into 5 main principles for the site. And see, these 5 things we feel like encapsulate everything that we heard and have driven the final master plan kind of framework that you'll see from Jeff in a few minutes. So connections about improving mobility in all ways and views and access to the water, programs and uses that are mixed use with a skyline that builds seamlessly with the city, of open spaces that provide waterfront access, playgrounds, parks, civic spaces, spaces for Charlestonians, of stormwater that is comprehensive in its management, and of coastal resiliency that provides the right sort of solutions for the city and also the larger peninsula plans that are going right now. So all of these principles have driven what we're going to see as we walk through the plan. And with that, I'll pass it over.
Thank you, Cassie. And thank you for having us here today. I see many familiar faces from the process that Cassie's described. And so for you, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to share this work with you again. But for those of you here today and many members of the commission, I know this may be the first time you're seeing any of our master planning work. So I do want to take the time to go through this in that order. So if you hear me repeat something that I said before, that's for good purpose. This is a site that defies a simple recipe. Like we're baking a cake that you have fixed recipes and produce similar results. This is a site that has a lot of characteristics that are unique to this very site, unique to Charleston and the environmental condition here, unique to a city with the kind of history that there is. And so there are many ways of talking about the master plan, and I'm going to talk about it through 3 different themes, about themes that come into this planning process from the past, things that we're hearing, concerns in the present, and then some aspirations for the future. I do need to talk about the site itself before going into that. And I think that the first way of thinking about this is, many of you know Union Pier. Some of you have visited the site. Many of you have not. And so for the uninitiated in this process, this is the Union Pier site, and we're up above the site on the east side, looking sort of northwest, and that's Market Street on the left-hand side, coming down all the way to the waterfront. You can identify the site easily by the large boat that's there. That is a cruise ship. There are industrial buildings on this site, industrial facilities, some of which serve the uses of the cruise facility, and some don't. Some are just industrial sheds that have industrial uses. By and large, the site is paved, it's hard, and it's effectively a large parking lot. It's a large parking lot, though, with some extraordinary characteristics. This is a half mile of waterfront in the heart of Charleston. This is a view on the piers. So these are when I'm talking about piers, I'm talking about what's under these people's feet in this view. These are concrete structures that suspended above the harbor, and this is looking south towards the cruise terminal. It has incredible exposure to the harbor and to the landmarks of Charleston here, to the Ravenel Bridge, over to Mount Pleasant. You can see more port facilities in the distance. It's absolutely incredible. This is a site that has been in transformation since the beginning of since before there was Charleston. And I'm going to go through a series of maps. The YouTube screen in the corner is blocking the dates, but we're going back to very early history in Charleston, and that in red is our Union Pier site, and you can see here that Union Pier wasn't even part of the peninsula of the city. It's marsh going back to the earliest days, and you can see through the evolution of the city here a basin and early pier structures serving industry from the beginning of the city. The growth of those piers in northward here up towards Lawrence Street. You can see the evolution of those piers. This is I think this one's the early 20th century. Regardless, you can see the full site, these finger piers reaching out into the harbor, transporting all manner of commerce that Charleston engaged in, from various products and agricultural goods to humans. And so you can see that evolution. This is 1957. There's some early changes afoot here. You can still see these historic piers fingering out into the harbor, but there are some other changes. There's rail that's coming and serving those. There's public housing that's come into land that also used to be part of the harbor, and you have a city evolving around this site. This is the property today, so this is the view that we were looking at from above, and still more changes have occurred. The slow but steady transformation of an industrial waterfront into a part of the city, where there once was public housing. There's now a park. Now there's condos, some of you I know live in those very condos because I've talked to you many times about them. There's a grocery store that provisions people here on the peninsula, and still there's this industrial facility. So this is a place that's in transformation. It has been, and when we're talking about a master plan, we're talking about a continued transformation. The property itself is 70 acres, and it's composed of two really important pieces. And so I talked about the piers and I pointed them out earlier. There's 30 acres of this site are beyond the critical line or beyond the edge of terra firma. And so everything on this side of that blue line, that's water, even though it looks like land. The water comes and laps up underneath these buildings and kisses the edge of the peninsula. There's 40 acres that are land. And this is, this is open parking areas. This, as opposed to many other development sites in the city, or even many of your own homes or businesses, this site has no infrastructure like streets or sewers or anything else that would serve this property for its absorption into the city. So just these two zones and the port of call facility, which will remain at the far southern end of the site, sort of set up in the highest level organization of this property into three chunks of a development area. So that 40 acres that are upland, that's area that we can build on. There's the port of call facility on the south, and an event space that the port intends to build out of the terminal building, which leaves a large portion on the northern side of the site, on the water side, that has ambiguous opportunities for its use. that it needs to serve maritime use. It's out over the water. And there are limitations on what you can build there. We think that that should be turned into a park for the city of Charleston, a large waterfront park. So this story of transformation is one that is the story of Charleston itself, mostly an evolving relationship of Charleston to its waterfront, and Charleston exists and thrives based on its relationships to the water. There are, Cassie went through and enumerated all of the kinds of comments we've received through this process so far, and we have put them into those buckets of connections and open space, and you'll see those. But I want to make sure you hear us and hear that these ideas have been incorporated into our master plan. So there are key themes from the past. Some of those themes no longer exist physically on the site today, but still linger in our memories. And the example of the mosquito fleet, who used to feed Charleston and launch themselves from Union Pier, that memory persists. But there's almost no remains of that legacy. At the end, so here we are, we're on the northern side now and looking back south. There is a location on the site where the fleet used to launch, and that's at the end of Lawrence Street, where there's this little pocket of marsh. And you'll see in our plans that we intend to preserve that little pocket of marsh, and we think that the maritime history that used to be hosted there should be brought back to that site. It's been brought to our attention through this process from the members of the Maritime School that there's an example in San Francisco of the Dolphin Club, where there's both a rowing school for people to gain access to the waterfront, but also a boat building school. We think that kind of use will honor history and bring it forward. Jacob mentioned the rice mill facade that's stands there in its kind of decrepit beauty, calling for us to preserve it, and we agree with that. And during the course of this planning process, we're working to engage a stonemason to come and work on this structure. Not only should the structure be preserved physically, and not just as a feature of a parking lot, but we think that it should be returned into the civic space of the city, and here positioned in a space that would have civic prominence facing back westward into the city towards Washington Street, and so anchoring a new park. There are other aspects of the past that are incredibly important to what Charleston is. Maybe first and foremost in our minds as urban planners is the urban fabric, collection of buildings and streets and public spaces, their scale, texture, character, that has a great prominence all around the site, but really no prominence within the Union Pier property itself. So first, we've heard through our meetings, and we feel like we're on good footing here to propose extending the street grid as it can Hazel and Society and Lawrence Street, extending Concord all the way north-south through, that the right-of-way is platted there, but the Concord is disconnected north to south, as well as extending the experience of the city out to the waterfront with new public spaces and new landmarks. And so we've documented those within our plan. There's an architectural heritage that maybe more than any other North American city, that architecture is something that people in Charleston truly experience. In a lot of cities that, even in great cities that people really, just exist and inhabit the public realm, and their experience is really defined by streets and what happens on the ground level. But there's such beautiful architecture in Charleston. We think this heritage needs to be pulled forward into this master plan, and we've worked very closely. Many of you have participated in our meetings, have seen these principles. So these 6 principles that we worked with Christian Sotil, the architect, on developing these, and hopefully you had a chance to interact with him through our meetings. And so I won't read all of these out to you, but we hope that you see yourselves reflected back in these 6 principles. There is a nature to Charleston skyline. And this is a view over, over the center of the peninsula, and you can see a collection of buildings. This image is taken from the rooftop of a building of a 4-story building, so you're standing at about 5 stories. There are 6-story trees in the city of Charleston. That there is also a textured and punctuated character to the skyline of Charleston. We think this should also be brought into the plan. That our master plan, we're not proposing a monoculture of buildings, a monoculture of heights. We're proposing to embody the best that Charleston has. We have this slide was actually a board, a printed board in our last workshop. I wanted to bring it here because as soon as we broke from the last presentation, everyone went over to the physical presentation, to our meeting space, and congregated around this board. These are maps of us trying to translate the heights of height districts in Charleston and the themes of a textured and punctuated skyline into a variety of maps, and we've gotten a lot of feedback on this through the course of the project. So these were 4 ways that the purple it increases in height, and the blue you can see matches the existing context, or matches the height districts that are in the city of Charleston. The legend on the top, just so that it's on the table, there's no secrets here. That in some of these locations, we're proposing buildings of 7 stories or taller. It's just a concept. Of these 4 ideas, one of these, I think that the easiest to see the contrast here is this map, which sort of broke the site into a northern and southern, where we're matching very closely the character and density of Gadsden Borough on the north and on the south, with height sort of hidden away in the middle of these groupings. We think when we come back with the PUD application, you'll see a map that's much more like the one on the right, that protects a sort of a lower height along the waterfront and along the edge of the city, getting towards Anson Borough, and concentrates any kinds of intensity in the center of the site. Probably most of you came just to see that map. But there are other concerns that we know that exist in this very moment, and water is one of those. I'm going to ask Jacob to come up and talk about this.
Great, thank you, Jeff. So these slides have been produced in conjunction, not just by Sherwood, our lead resiliency engineer, but Perkins and Will, Thomas and Hutton, as well as many people who have worked on this project so far. Now, the most important thing when we think about water management here is we have a comprehensive solution to water management. One of the things we learned beginning in 2018 when we started the Dutch dialogues process is how important it is in Charleston to think about all the different types of water that interact at different times. And that's what we asked our teams to do. To really think, I'm assuming there's a laser here, there is, to really think about not just rainwater and where it goes, but also floods that happen, hurricanes, of course, tides going in and out, groundwater, which is something we've learned a lot about how groundwater interacts with flooding, surface runoff caused by stormwater, land subsidence, land compressing and going down, and most importantly, sea level rise. This is a plan that is sea level rise ready. And that's what you'll see in our approach. management. When we talk about layered protection, we're specifically talking about perimeter protection, the way that we keep storm surge out of the peninsula. Well, Union Pier is unique because Union Pier has layers of structures leading up to the water. Unlike the rest of the peninsula, there's already the existing giant pier outside of the land. So we can actually utilize that existing pier to layer the protection instead of having to have a single point of storm surge protection at Union Pier. It's a huge advantage. We ask the teams to think holistically, look at all those different types of water, and of course to be ecologically sensitive, because this is a site that today is entirely impervious and its edge has been a working waterfront edge. So we have a chance to really work to restore marsh ecology at the site. First of all, the coastal barrier. Mitigate storm surge, and we've got lots of different ways to do this, using deployables as well as permanently installed solutions. We've looked at flood protection to address sunny day flooding. This is the kind of flooding that happens at all the corner low streets when tide gets higher than the outfall. Now, I want to give credit where it's due to not just the city, not just Charleston Water, but also to the Ports Authority, who have already contributed $100,000 or more each to go ahead and install tide check valves. Those are going in now, and the Ports Authority, as well as those other groups led by the city, have funded the installation of tide check valves at Union Pier today. So the sunny day flooding that occurs today at Lawrence and Washington, at Hazel in Washington, I believe. I have to remember, gotta remember where they are. Those will stop because the tide check valve is being installed. So thank you to the Ports Authority for moving on that already. Making sure that stormwater, of course, is managed not just to the city standards, but to the best possible way that we can on this site. Using best management practices, which is what that stands for, as well as, of course, natural enhancements to make sure we have living shorelines where they work, as well as restoring marsh ecology throughout the site. That's what our teams derive. Now, what happens during a hurricane? Same thing that happens everywhere else in Charleston. If the barrier is lower than the waves end up on the land. And today, to look at some of our key elevations, I want to point to the 10-foot elevation here. The existing piers are at 9 feet above mean low water. 9-foot elevation. The coastal AE flood zone is at 12, and the former V zone is at 15 feet. So Hurricane Hugo was 12 foot. So that's a datum for you. So the Corps of Engineers elevation for establishing a perimeter barrier all the way around the peninsula is 12 feet. And that mark is the one that's been set by the Corps of Engineers to keep storm surge out. 15 is the one that's a little beefier and we think is sea level rise ready, which is what we're designed to do. So specifically, this is how this works in the future at Union Pier, to the point of layered protection. We hope to actually improve what the piers do for waves by fitting them with baffles or other structures that will take energy out of waves, so that by the time storm surge waves get to the upland part, they've already crashed against the underside of the pier heads. This is a huge advantage that we don't have anywhere else. It's basically putting a wave attenuator out in harbor, but it already exists. In addition, we hope to build the center of the site up so that we hit that 15-foot elevation, which means that the ground level, and the vast majority of Union Pier in the future, can have storefronts, can have residences on the street level, as opposed to the building being up on stilts and behind an empty facade, which is what you see throughout the rest of the peninsula today, where parking is the thing behind the ground level of the building. At Union Pier in the future, by putting these flood protections in place, we can actually have activated ground level, creating that great street level experience like you have everywhere else in Charleston. And this is what it would look like. And it's important that these are hand drawings, but they're accurate. We always like to be sure that we are being accurate and truthful in our images. So the heights of these buildings are what are being proposed. That's a 7-story structure right there at the top. That's what 7 stories look like. And this is the experience of the waterfront. This is the experience of a resilient waterfront, connecting people to the water by using all of those different tools in the kit. And in addition to thinking about storm surge and how we protect from it, we are also thinking about what happens with rainwater. How do we handle storm surge? And in this case, our design teams have worked to design a system that is straight from the Dutch Dialogues playbook. It's a folder system where rainwater falls, it goes down to the perimeter, and is cleaned and filtered and distributed back into the harbor. That system means that underneath our streets, we'll have storage. Rainwater will be stored everywhere that it can. And this slide is one that shows how the whole system comes together into one. Specifically, this thick line in different colors here shows where the storm surge barrier will attach back to the future Corps of Engineers 3x3 perimeter. So we can plug in on both sides, protecting Union Pier and the rest of the peninsula, as well as using the existing structures at the edge to take energy out of waves to be sure that when winds do hit the land, they aren't damaging it. In addition, these green pathways that you see here, as well as the blue pathways, are absorbing rainwater, storing them, and making sure that we don't overwhelm any area or Union Pier with stormwater, so that we have a coordinated system that manages water throughout the site. We're really proud of the solution that the engineers have put together, and we think it's a model. So with that said, I'm going to hand this back over to Jack.
So a very important dimension of the waterfront is thinking of this this comprehensive water plan. How do we see water not as a threat, but as an opportunity for changing the relationship of the city to its waterfront? And so this is just an early rough sketch of just going around the peninsula and trying to characterize the experience. Do you have, is there even public access to the waterfront or not? Are there amenities there or not? And there's an incredible broken stretch that you can see on the eastern side. That is the Union Pier Port facility. Other cities are around the country, and New York is notable for both being forward thinking about sea level rise and climate change, but also being forward looking about old pier structures and the ability of those pier structures to provide an amenity for the city. And so you can see Brooklyn Bridge Park here. These are also pier structures here, soccer field here, park. And there's these are lovely images and lovely places. And there's no reason that Charleston also can't have experiences like this. That for one of the great harbor cities in the country, there's a less than appealing experience at the waterfront, unless you're lucky enough to have a boat and get out there. We want to change that. And so there are opportunities for the future. And I'm gonna talk about the waterfront part at the end, but the first opportunity and the most important opportunity that Jacob spoke about at the beginning of our presentation is just purely the creation of a new neighborhood in the city, a neighborhood where one does not presently exist. And so there's parts to neighborhoods. There are people, there are residents, there might be people working there. They create neighbors for one another, and there's people that come and visit. And there are places, and we've talked about some of those places, the character of the streets, the character of the parks, some of the gardens. And those people, then when there's people there, they're housed somewhere. And so the proposal that we have is for multifamily housing, by and large, office space, where appropriate, restaurants and retail. We think there's a strong demand for restaurant and retail along the waterfront in Charleston, and hotels. Of the mix here, really the thing that likely will be in the PUD is that multifamily housing is the largest part of the program. And then we're creating of the elements of the city something that's exceptional. We've heard of things that people would hope to see on the Union Pier site. We've heard dog parks dominate the conversation, and it's the kind of infrastructure that neighborhoods truly need. We've also heard the need for some kind of a destination for Charlestonians and people within the region. We think a destination play space fits that bill, something that people would come to here on this site and be able to stay a while. And we think that those everyday kinds of uses really can be exceptional. The experience of Union Pier today is anything but exceptional. And this is, chosen for some of its lack of beauty, but it's just the site. So this is my own photo of Concord Street. Feels like yesterday with water standing there. We think that Concord can and should be one of the great streets of Charleston. And as Jacob said, we're trying to, in these illustrations, show you our actual intent with our height maps and plans. And so these building heights are accurate. I know you'll count up the floors for me. But this is looking north on Concord, near the intersection of Hazel and Concord, the future intersection of Hazel and Concord. Today, so these are sort of a before and after idea that we have. So today, the streets as they come perpendicular into the site are all terminated by existing buildings. And so there really is no visual or physical access to the harbor through the Union Pier site. We intend to change that. So left side to right side in a very simple way. And so we think that if you live in Ansonboro and you're walking to the harbor, that experience should be rewarded at the end. So this is hit at the end of Hazel Street, also being accurate in the heights and the proposal that we're making, a new space that would overlook the harbor. There's not only is Union Pier sort of a void in the physical experience of the city, but also it holds no prominence from the waterfront. And we've had this idea throughout the project that here just characterized in an early study, but of some kind of an art piece or a beacon along the waterfront. And the Union Pier and Charleston in general the finest time to be in Charleston should be at night. And the finest place to be really should be on the waterfront, like other great cities. Along the waterfront, we've kind of field tested some ideas for what to do with those 33 acres of waterfront piers. And for those of you who haven't been in those conversations, we've talked about how much of the piers do we keep and how much do we remove and for what purpose. And so we've been through these plans and we solicited comment, and we think the best idea in this moment is for building on the layered approach to water management that Jacob described, is that we really need to, in order to build back an ecological edge or build back marsh along the perimeter of the peninsula, you actually have to daylight some of the water. And so we've proposed cutting a channel through those pier structures. Literally, these are concrete piers, literally sawing out sections of the decking and using the piers or the pile caps to help build marsh structure. Threading a continuous public promenade from Waterfront Park, connecting up to the International African American Museum and northward, exposing people to the harbor views and creating new places and new experiences that just don't exist yet in the center of the peninsula in Charleston. This is a view of a piece of that waterfront park. You can see the event space at the cruise ship terminal, at the Port of Call facility, and new structures animating a waterfront, building up the height to build resilience and be able to address sea level rise while making an experience in a promenade and marsh ecology. Those ideas are what is in our master plan, and for a lot of people, not many people look at these kinds of drawings all the time, and so we wanted to show you our thinking before showing you this drawing. So this is the horizontal organization of the spaces of Union Pier. This includes a a realignment of a connection of Washington Street to East Bay as a reliever of traffic, and taking some of the heat off of East Bay as such a heavy and dangerous corridor to both drive on and walk on. And so Washington Street has a lot of ability here. Of new parks and public spaces, this is the rice mill. There are a collection of pocket parks along Washington Street helping serve as dog parks and destination spaces as people come into the development. The connection of Concord Street, you can sort of follow some of these gray lines. So as much porousness and permeability through the body of this plan as possible. The pink areas, these are building zones. Those are where buildings would go. Those are not buildings themselves. It's a proposal of where to locate buildings within this civic structure. And so you see some walkways, so alleys through some of these blocks, and also some vehicular alleys to help serve these areas without having loading all around the perimeters of these blocks. This is a big complicated drawing, and it's why we've had a lot of the meetings that we've had to be able to reflect with people one-on-one about what they're seeing here. We had this printed at the scale of a billboard so people could walk on it and find their homes and walk through this with us. Our ultimate objective is not to do a deal, and it never has been from the beginning of this process as communicated to us. It's to return a piece of Charleston back to the city, and in a way that best serves your needs. Cassie went through our principles. Anything we would want to say here, and I'm gonna hand this over to Jacob if you want to.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, we've been going for an hour now. That means we need to stop talking. Mr. Chair, if you permit, just a couple of other items to put on the record. A few things that I omitted to bring up before, and I'm not going to read their principles again, but they're here for reference. The first thing is that I want to be very clear with everyone that our intention here with the waterfront is that this waterfront be public, owned by the citizens of Charleston, public forever. That's our intent. To open that up, make that a public space, not owned by developers. The other thing that I want to be very clear about here is this marina that we're showing. This is in feasibility study. We don't know that that's going to be possible. We just don't want to preclude it. We don't want to make it impossible to do. But there are many complexities associated with that. And I just want to make sure that everyone knows we don't know if it's going to be feasible, if it's going to be possible, but we're currently exploring that. So those are just two other items. And there's one third item that I didn't speak about that I omitted, and Jordy, I may call on you. And this is related to the port of call. This is just one other piece that I forgot to mention at the start that I think is important to just so you know all of our thinking. Jordy, do you want to talk a little bit about the port of call usage and how that works here at the passenger terminal?
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. Yeah, to be very clear, because I think there's been maybe some miscommunication about this in the community. So transitioning from a home port operation to a port of call operation, there still will be cruise ships here. You just will not drive to Charleston to go on your cruise. So maybe you've boarded a ship in New York and you stop off in Charleston on your way to the Bahamas and vice versa. So the Port Authority will retain ownership of that portion of the property. We will continue to operate under the MOU that we have with the city, which limits to 104 calls a year, 3,500 passengers max. So some of the cruise ships that you see here today are ports of call. There's the Enchantment of the Sea. There's a seaborne cruise ship that come here. So those types of cruise ships will still be here. They just won't be boarding and unboarding and unloading passengers here at the terminal. It's our vision as soon as we will not be renewing the contract with Carnival for the home port at the end of 2024, and that we will then engage in renovating that space to be utilized both for the ports of call and for event spaces. We heard a lot through the community engagement about previous uses of that space. I think Spalato used to hold some events there, the tall ships, things of that nature. We envision bringing that back together and having that as an option for the community. So, thank you for that.
Okay, so I'll wrap with that, and I'll just say it at the end. first of all, thank you again to you for taking time out of your day. Also to the public who have contributed so much to this plan so far and continue to bring the best ideas forward. This is a plan that really has been created in collaboration with the public, in addition to some of the best design and engineer minds and practitioners in the world. So I personally am thrilled that this is where we are today. This plan will get better where it is now, and it's already a tremendous contribution to the public realm of Charleston. So thank you. With that, we'll take questions. I'll go to you, Mr. Chair, or to you, Mr. Moore. I don't know who I'm going back to.
First thing I want to ask either Mr. Morgan or Jacob, to you is, again, let's go through the timetable. Again, we're months away from this coming forward, any kind of vote or anything else, but let's talk through where we may see it today.
So our intent is to begin the process. Request there to turn microphones on. We are currently, again, documenting the plan, continue to take public input, which we will do until this project is completed. And we are working on a planned unit development, working on our zoning requests. We're going to begin that process at the beginning of the year, and our intent is to have the PUD to you by April. So through the late winter and spring, we'll be working on PUD, the zoning request. That's when you'll see it next.
Right, and so there'll be plenty of, obviously, still some public input and everything else at that time, public hearings and that's.
That's correct. This goes through the same public hearing process as any other zoning request. In the meantime, of course, really anyone can reach out to me, reach out to the board, and we'll make sure that we get a meeting together. And we'll continue to go and talk with individuals, groups, neighborhoods, anyone who's interested. We're happy to go and sit down, not just give a presentation, but also incorporate new input.
A lot of good information today, and we appreciate it. Commission members, I'm gonna see who has questions. Ms. Jacobs, if you don't have a question, I'm gonna be shocked. No? Anyone, questions, comments?
Question.
Go ahead, Ms. Harrison.
One question I did have is just mainly about this height and how that the interplay between the way you've done this road grid and if I was standing in the East Rasboro or Ansonboro, what's that view corridor gonna be like? Because it looks like you've got building types that are gonna be mass buildings, but there's no kind of the undulation of where you've got like smaller, detached or attached, smaller scale housing concepts.
Right. So the question is about height, view corridors, and how that works on the site. So I'm not going to go back to it. There's a really great slide earlier that shows the present view corridors. Next time you're at Union Pier, pay attention. The streets today terminate in warehouses. So you really never get a straight shot of the water. What you see at the back of all the warehouses. And in the future, what this plan proposes are extensions of the existing streets that go off of East Bay that will go straight to the water. So from this point, you can see these corridors that go straight out. So from this point, I know I'm not speaking to a mic, my apologies. The view corridors will actually be open, going all the way out to the water. And I want to especially draw your attention to the location, which is in the center of the plan right here. And I'll use a laser instead of going there in person. Right here, there's a break in the piers. And this really sets up Hazel Street to be the center of the future Union Pier neighborhood with a clear view all the way out to the water. And there was a rendering before that was labeled Hazel Place that creates a public waterfront space right here. So the views to the water in the future are actually going to be opened up, whereas today you don't have those corridors that block. The other thing, of course, is that you have public access to the waterfront itself. So you can go to the water, which today you can't do. So there's additional public access at the waterfront, at the water's edge. With that said, existing heights throughout the site, with existing heights around the perimeter, we have buildings that are 5 and 6 stories here, the new Cooper Hotel, which is just topped out. You can go see this today. That's a 6-story building. So if you go to the site and you're looking for context, that's what you're seeing when you look at the Cooper, 6 stories. And just as at the Cooper, the intention of a truly public waterfront really gives more access to the water than it takes away, because previously there was no waterfront access at this site. And the same thing will occur throughout. The last thing I'll say about heights, as Jeff mentioned, the intent of this design is to provide variation in heights, just like you see throughout the rest of Charleston, instead of a monolithic height. And you can see, obviously, in various projects across the peninsula, especially in our old height system, you had buildings that were flat and they were flat all the way across, all the way across. That's not the height proposal that we're going to bring to you. We're going to bring a proposal that includes variation in height. So there will be points that are lower, there will be points that are higher. The new view corridors will increase visibility to the water, and then the waterfront itself actually can put people at the waterfront in a way that's never happened before at this site. So does that answer the question?
Sort of, because I understand the view corridor if I'm standing at the site, Hassel Street, if I'm, looking towards the view corridor, but if I'm, I guess, what is that, the west, or actually going north, the north.
That way.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Like what I was, so if I'm over in the north side of East Bay towards the other side of where see Gaston Rural Park or further down where Wallace would have been located, what's that view corridor gonna look like?
It's a great question. So in today's Gadsden Park, you're standing in the middle of Gadsden Park. You might get a little glimpse if you look out this way in between the Gadsden condos as well as Anson House and Lawrence Place. You might get a little view going out that way today, and that would still be there. In fact, what we're proposing is to widen Lawrence Street by backing the buildings off of Lawrence Street. So Lawrence would actually get wider than it is today, and we would have a park-like stormwater corridor that would have bioswales as well as new plantings. So Lawrence gets wider, and a wetland restoration area would occur here. So you would still have the existing views from Gadsdenburg. The little peak that you get of the water would be there, and it would actually be enhanced. So those would all be in place. And most importantly, we hope to connect our continuous pathway. So if you're in this area at the International African American Museum, at the aquarium, you would have a public connection on the waterfront to be able to get down further on the south of the site.
Great. Mr. Bailey?
Thank you. Whoa. Thank you for the presentation today. And, I can remember being a child thinking that this site was ugly. So I'm excited about the future here. I was glad to hear that as part of sort of your core principles, you want to make sure that it's a place where it's more pedestrian friendly, that it's safer, that I don't know if you actually said you may have that it relieves traffic, or are you far enough in your thinking yet to talk about some of the strategies to execute on those things?
It's a great question. It's about how do you execute strategies of actually improving mobility on the peninsula. So the first thing that you'll see in the plan is a new street grid. New streets connected across the site. Unlike other developments that happen in the majority of other developments that happen in downtown Charleston, most other developments are buildings that are built in the existing street grid. Well, this is a chance to build new streets that can distribute traffic, new streets that provide new routes, new connections, and actually open up new paths of travel, not just for people in cars, but for people on foot, for people on bikes, as well as for transit. This could set up a great transit route from Calhoun to Concord, back to Market, and really interlock with all the transit routes that CARTA already has, and probably create some new ones. So the first piece is interconnected street grid that you don't have today. Driving north in Concord, I do it every day. You can't go through the site, you end up diverted onto Washington or East Bay, and then you probably have to wait at a light to get on Space Street. Now, the second strategy, in addition to the interconnected street grid, is to follow through on an old idea that's been around for at least 30 years, probably more, which is to improve the East Bay and Washington corridors. Now, this goes back to at least the 1996 plan for Union Pier. It's called for in the 1999 downtown plan, which is to actually divert East Bay Street onto what is today's Washington. And as you all know, again, I think everybody's already, just for reference here, we're turned 90 degrees, north is over here. This is Market Street, this is East Bay Street. In today's East Bay Street, if you're going north and you pass Market, you know what happens. There are 4 lanes, but they really function like 2. It's very tight. That little segment of street isn't the best for automobile mobility, and it's certainly not the best for being on a bicycle because it's too tight. In the future, this plan calls for East Bay Street to divert onto Washington. And this segment of Washington Street actually runs through Union Pier, so the chance exists to widen it, to design it the right way, to make sure you have the correct widths for all the different modes of travel that need to be on that street. That means that Washington can be functioning like today's East Bay and designed the right way, because you could rebuild the street entirely to meet the needs. Now, this corridor has got to be studied. It's got to be really looked at as to how it all works. To make a long story short, it can distribute traffic, it can make north-south movement better for all the modes, and it can take all the pressure off of East Bay that exists today. We think this is a huge improvement. And by the way, that would include rebuilt intersections at every one of those points. New sidewalks, new crosswalks, new lights, make sure that they're all being designed and handled properly. We could go on. There's one other minor detail that I want to emphasize. You probably saw in the renderings, which is it's just Jake thought, it's just me. I think the sidewalks are too narrow on the majority of our main streets in Charleston. So we're shooting for wider sidewalks on Concord Street, the main sort of high street, to make sure that we have space for pedestrians. So I'll leave it at that.
That's great. I appreciate what stage of the process we're at. I just think when we get to the official request in April or whenever it is, I think that when every month when we meet, and you of course know this from your past, the things we hear over and over again are traffic, flooding, mobility, so affordability of housing options. So as much detail as possible on how those things will be executed. And then just a final comment, and not looking for a response today, but we sit here and talk about planning the site, and I like the slide that had the variation in rooftops. I thought that was interesting of the existing skyline. But I sit in meetings frequently and hear really good architects try to sell something that I don't think they even really love, but they're being pressured by a developer to squeeze as much space into what the zoning allows as possible. And so I don't know that what we can do about that, but to the extent that whenever this gets handed off to private hands, there's the ability to continue to have that variety in the skyline that you showed in the picture of St. Philip's. Because you know, sometimes the architect is blamed for building something ugly, but it's really just the money is driving the tallest box possible. So that's just a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey.
I tell you, it's interesting, and I really love the thoughts that y'all have on the Hazel Street extension, Society Street, Washington Street. Those all make so much sense. I mean, to be able to include that all the way to the waterfront is wonderful. Those are great concepts. Ms. Harrison?
One other question I did have is that a long time ago, I remember hearing about these concepts of pedestrian only zones. Where would those be located? So, because, you know, your view corridors and connectivity, where would these areas where there would be pedestrian only, like we would see, and where you would kind of create a traffic flow around those zones?
So I'm actually going to let Jeff answer that from our planning team. I'm going to let him walk you through how our streets work.
Great question. So the pedestrian only zones of this plan, there is that, so all of the waterfront, it would be pedestrian only, as well as a series of walkways or pedestrian ways that would connect all the way back from Washington Street to the waterfront. So this is pedestrian only. This is pedestrian only, including the park with the rice mill facade. This is pedestrian only, and so at the end of Pinckney Street, you'd be in a pedestrian only zone going all the way to the waterfront. There is you would have to get services at least out to buildings that would help define that edge, and so We do have a street that comes and turns back. So it starts at Concord and comes and turns back. From that forward would all be pedestrian. I think there's also kind of like a hierarchy or an order of these spaces where there would be really more vehicular access to the body of this, and as you get further out, less and less. And so once you really moved past Concord Street, I think that we would design those almost as a contiguous public round, so that you would feel comfortable, stepping out walking through the street as if they were on a plaza. But the space that at the end of Hazel is there. This is those steps and that promenade I showed you in that one image, all pedestrian. This is sorry, the lasers, losing the laser. This kind of wedge at the end is a really interesting space, a closet that would open up to the north. This is another one of those spaces between the buildings, and we talked about it early in the presentation. All the way down Lawrence Street, there would be a widened like linear park that would run down, start all the way at Concord. So today there's, go down to the end of Concord and Lawrence, and you see parking lot for a ways. We want to bring that experience of the waterfront all the way back to Concord,
Right.
and then preserving that.
Thank you. I know we're running out of time. Ms. Lampesis, go ahead.
Elaborate a little further on what Mr. Bailey said, and that actually after our visit to the site, when we step back the scale of the buildings, I would love to be able to see, even if it means increasing the height, a little bit more of a gabled effect. I really noticed in that picture that there's a lot of flat buildings, and I just don't think flat buildings go in my town, and we have had an awful lot of them recently. We're not BBAR, we don't want to be, but we have an opportunity now to comment on what we're going forward with. And I would just like for the team to be a little bit cognizant of that and just not stepping it back to a flat building in the center.
Well, Ms. Jacobs and then Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation. I've been to most of your meetings and I've watched the evolution of this. It's a lot of thought, a lot of elegance in the draft for us to digest. So I really appreciate that. I have a few questions. One is, you said the marina is in a feasibility study. If it's not feasible to build a marina, you have a plan B. You don't necessarily have to, illustrate that today, but it would be nice for us to kind of know at some point what the plan B thought process is. So it isn't like oh my God, it's mid-stage.
Right, absolutely. So the question is about the marina. And first of all, the feasibility issues with marina are: one, dredging has to be dredged in order to maintain that. Second thing are any pollutants that may be in the silt underneath. Those are two critical issues that we're exploring. Those are the factors that we're evaluating. In terms of the future use, if it doesn't end up being a marina in this master plan, you would see open water and marsh restoration.
Okay. And I'm going to go back to streets for a minute. We've talked a lot about that, but who will actually own those streets?
Our intent is for the streets to be entirely public, owned by the city of Charleston.
Okay, because that makes a difference in complete street construction over like South Carolina Department of Transportation. That's why I was asking about specific street ownership, but in the area.
Ms. Johnson, go ahead.
One couple other questions. You said that certain areas are public forever. How are we doing that? Is that by deed restriction, trust, city ownership?
Great question. The answer is we don't know. They're done in all different ways. At the Cooper, there's a use and access in the Cooper Hotel, which of course is this location right here. In that case, Lowe created a use and access easement with the city, a use and access agreement that specifies what's public, what's private, and how that's done. But the answer is that that's to be determined at a future date by the future owner and the city. They could be fee simple, could be through some access agreement. We would work through each one of the public spaces in sequence to make sure that the right kind of dedication has been achieved.
And you put a lot of thought into some really elegant infrastructure here. This is going to be probably very costly. And then we're going to try to balance that with affordable housing as part of the use of the area. Do you have any thoughts about how that's going to work?
The hardest part of the whole project is the economics of it. You hit on an important aspect. To build a neighborhood here requires complete reconstruction of the entire site. It requires complete demolition of all the facilities that are here and rebuilding of the entire surface of the site to build new parking, new stormwater, new power, all wet and dry utilities, new parking. Did I say that already? I think I did. It's going to be parking here. It's a very, very costly endeavor. The reconstruction of the water's edge itself is a very, very costly endeavor. All of these things they represent the maximum level of investment that can be made in Charleston in a real estate development, in my opinion. There is no other site like Union Pier, and no other reconstruction of a site has been attempted at this scale. So it's going to be very, very costly. That's just the truth. Not for you all to think on and decide on. We had discussed the idea of entering into a tax increment finance district, the TIF district, which is very common in the state of South Carolina, as well as here in Charleston. And that's something that we have discussed in order to help offset that incredible infrastructure burden.
Ms. Johnson, this was saying.
You just mentioned parking. So this is a great example of public space. I love the design. I anticipate that there will be a lot of visitors to this space. Can you talk a little bit about, I know there'll be parking on the streets. You mentioned that the retail would actually be able to be street front here, which precludes the lower level parking unless you do it from the back. So just maybe just a 30,000-foot view of parking in this area would be helpful.
Great, thank you. We don't have our slides in parking here, although if anybody wants to see them, I'm happy to go down that pathway. We can talk in detail on parking. So specifically, this project will park itself, as we say. All the uses that occur on Union Pier will park on Union Pier. It won't spill parking over into adjacent neighborhoods. That's a mandatory, it's a mandatory thing from a development standpoint, as well as just from a city planning standpoint. So that's the first thing to know. Second thing is that when it comes to parking, the strategy works like this. There is underneath the majority of the site a single level of subterranean parking in this design. So it only goes one car deep, not very deep, but there is a single level underneath the city blocks in this drawing. And that parks a significant number of cars. About a third of the parking load is parked underground, or in what will be in the future underground. The additional parking is handled in parking structures that will be shielded, that will be hidden, and that will be unseen if the design is handled the right way, and it will be because it will be designed and baked into the way that the coding works. So the majority will be handled in parking decks, and about a third will be handled underground. In terms of getting into those, you would have, just like you have the VAR spends tremendous time in Charleston making sure that those garage entries look good and they're cladded like windows and doors, and the same thing is the case here. So I don't know if that answers the question about parking.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really more comments than questions. First of all, I know we're at the beginning of this process, but I think from the comments you've heard from the commission, I think we like the way this is going. And I want to say thank you to the Ports Authority for engaging in this process, engaging us in this process early, engaging the public in this process early. I think that's, for this to be successful, that's going to be critical, as we know how engaged the public is in the planning process here in Charleston. The second thank you is to Lowe, and that is for assembling a great team, which includes bringing back Jacob Lindsay from Colorado. You know, I just think that was a masterstroke, and I think that will be seen in this plan. And my third comment really is kind of related to what Ms. Jacobs got onto, and that is, to me, the success of this project, which is the project of a lifetime in Charleston for this team, the success of this is going to come down to the quality of the public realm. I mean, this is all about public realm. And look at all those streets, look at all those trees, those parks, that access to the waterfront. I mean, what this potentially could offer to the city is just staggering. But it's all going to depend on the quality of that public realm, the quality of those streets, the quality of those sidewalks, and how those sidewalks address, how the buildings that are built there address those sidewalks and streets. It's about that infrastructure that you mentioned, that, not just stormwater conveyance under those streets, but there's actually going to be storage of stormwater under those streets. And you wouldn't be surprised to hear this from me, and that is these parks. And what a tremendous opportunity those parks, the island park, but also, you know, the park around the Bennett Rice Mill, the waterfront park. The opportunities those offer for the city, for its residents, for visitors are just, you know, off the charts and so exciting. Now, I've been on this commission for a little while and been around the city for a little while, and I've seen really great plans come before the community that have great streets planned, have great parks planned. And back to Ms. Jacobs' point, this will be expensive to do well. And that, I think, comes back to the plan and to the Ports Authority. You know, there will have to be, if this will be paid for with a TIF and a mid, there's going to have to be some density here in order to create the increment necessary to build all this infrastructure, which is so critical to making it happen. So I just say that as a comment, but also a fact that if we want this to be successful, and I don't think there's any reason to do it if it's not going to be successful, you know, we're going to have to embrace the fact that, you know, in order to build, this is the ultimate infill site. And we want this to be successful. So this mid and TIF need to have the heft and muscle behind it in order to be able to fund these improvements and to make those streets and sidewalks and parks just as the best they can possibly do. So thanks.
Great comments.
So same. Any other commission members? Again, we appreciate the fact that y'all spent time with us both on the site and willing to see us again on site if need be. Appreciate the y'all coming together for this meeting and the team you put together for the work they've done. And Mr. Morgan to help to facilitate this. If there are other questions, comments, anything else, Mr. Morgan, we need to address? So, there's a motion to adjourn this meeting. Mr. Bailey, second by Mr. Sane, all in favor? Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to the public for being here as well.